The stars heard their cry, only humanity responded. Vertical bar HFY Reddit. The stars had always carried secrets, but this one was different. Far out in the cold silence of space, a faint signal drifted like a whisper no one cared to hear. Countless civilizations had noticed it in passing. They scanned it, logged it, and then discarded it as useless background noise. To them, it was too weak, too broken, too unimportant to waste thought on. On Earth, though, things were different. Humanity had a habit of chasing questions others left behind. At a modest research station on the far side of the moon, a small team of scientists worked late into the night. The screens in front of them flickered with static, numbers, and waveforms. For weeks they had been studying the faint signal, picking apart every fragment, listening for patterns that no one else had noticed. Dr. Elaine Carter, a communications specialist with tired eyes and a restless mind, leaned over her console. She tapped a sequence of keys, letting the signal play out again in its raw form. It was little more than a broken hum, rising and falling like the breath of a dying creature. "It's not random," she said softly. Her colleague, Ravi Das, pushed his chair closer. "We've checked a dozen times. It looks like static to most." "Why are you so sure?" "Because I hear rhythm," Elaine whispered. "Not music, not speech, but intent. Something is buried in there." For 3 nights straight they worked without rest. Algorithms were built, broken down, and rebuilt again. Every time a piece of the message came into focus, another part fell apart. Still, they refused to stop. Humanity had never been the kind to ignore a voice crying in the dark. Finally, a fragment appeared. It was only a handful of words, distorted but clear enough to send a chill through the room. "Help. We are still here." The room fell silent. Elaine stared at the screen, her hand frozen over the keyboard. Ravi swallowed hard, his voice suddenly thin. That was a message. Someone's out there. No one slept that night. They fed the signal into every system they had, amplifying, filtering, stretching out the static until more fragments appeared. A story began to take shape. The call was old, perhaps centuries. It had been sent again and again, growing weaker each time, carried on the edge of dying technology. Who sent this? Someone asked, but no one could answer. The only certainty was that it was not human. The voice carried a timbre too strange, too fragile to be anything from Earth. The news reached the United Nations within days. Some leaders dismissed it as a curiosity, an echo of a species already extinct. But others listened. Humanity's history was full of moments where they had been overlooked, underestimated, and yet they had endured. The idea of ignoring a plea for help, even one centuries old, felt wrong in the marrow of their bones. Meetings followed. Debates turned heated. Why spend resources chasing ghosts when Earth itself still faced struggles? Yet against the tide of doubt, a stubborn sense of duty grew. Humanity had always believed that no voice deserved silence. Finally, the decision was made. A small exploratory mission would set out. Not a fleet, not a warship, but a single vessel with enough range to trace the signal to its source. Volunteers flooded the lists. Engineers, scientists, explorers, and dreamers all wanted to be part of something larger than themselves. When the ship Aurora was selected, its crew felt the weight of history on their shoulders. They were not heading out for conquest or riches. They were leaving because someone had asked for help, and no one else had come. The night before launch, Elaine stood on the observation deck of the lunar base, watching Earth hang like a jewel in the black sky. Her heart pounded with equal parts fear and wonder. She thought of the message, the fragile, broken voice that had traveled across the stars. Somewhere out there, someone had cried, believing no one would hear. "We heard you," she whispered, as if the stars themselves were listening. "And we're coming." The countdown began the next morning. Humanity, for all its flaws and failures, had made its choice. Where the mighty civilizations of the galaxy had turned away, humanity leaned forward. They would follow the voice to its end, no matter how far, no matter the cost. The engines roared, and the Aurora rose into the dark. Across the stars, the faint signal kept playing, a forgotten cry carried on the wind of space. and for the first time someone was answering. The journey of the Aurora stretched longer than anyone expected. Through endless nights of silence, the ship chased the faint trail of the signal, leaping between stars, crossing dark fields of space where no light had touched for centuries. The crew carried the weight of hope and doubt. What if the signal came from a world already dead? What if nothing waited at the end but dust and silence? Elaine Carter often stood at the forward window, staring into the void as if she could see their destination through sheer will. The broken voice from the recording still echoed in her memory. Every word reminded her that they were not traveling toward riches or conquest, but toward lives forgotten. Weeks passed before the ship's sensors caught sight of the planet. It hung weakly in the dim glow of a dying star. From space, it looked sick, its surface cracked with dry scars, its oceans shrunken into pale shadows, and its air thick with gray haze. It was a place struggling to breathe. Captain Alvarez gave the order to orbit. The crew leaned forward at their screens, silence filling the command deck. Cities, once vast and proud, were now broken ruins. Towers leaned at impossible angles, and bridges lay shattered. Yet among the ruins, faint energy signals flickered like embers refusing to die. "They're still here," whispered Ravi. Unable to keep the awe from his voice, the Aurora descended. As the ship broke through the clouded atmosphere, the crew saw them, the survivors. They were delicate beings with slender frames and wings that no longer carried them into the air. Their bodies looked fragile, their movements slow and weary, as if the very air pressed too heavily upon them. When the humans stepped out, the aliens recoiled in fear at first. Strange figures in heavy suits, taller and broader than they had ever seen. But when the humans raised their hands, showing no weapons, and offered food and clean water, the fear softened into disbelief. One of the beings stepped forward. Its feathers, once bright, were now faded to gray. Its voice trembled as it spoke in a language long lost to most of the galaxy. The translator struggled but managed to form the words. You came?" Elaine felt her throat tighten. She nodded, speaking gently. "We heard your cry, we could not ignore it." The alien's eyes glistened, though it was clear they had forgotten what hope looked like. For generations they had sent their call into the stars, and for generations no one had come. To them, the arrival of these strange humans felt like a dream. Days turned into weeks as the crew of the Aurora worked among the survivors. The planet's systems were failing. Water was poisoned, crops withered, and the ground itself seemed unwilling to give life anymore. The survivors lived in small groups, clinging to the ruins of their ancestors, waiting for the inevitable end. Yet the humans did not speak of endings. They spoke of fixing, of building, of surviving. They brought filters that turned gray water into something drinkable. They planted seeds from earth and soil thought barren, and green sprouts rose where only dust had been. They repaired broken shelters, lighting them with energy cells from the ship. The survivors watched in silence at first, too tired to believe. But slowly, their eyes began to change. Children who had never smiled before touched the green sprouts with wonder. Elders wept when they tasted water free of bitterness. For the first time in living memory, they felt something other than despair. One evening, as the suns dipped low, the leader of the survivors, an elder named Kale, approached. "Elaine." His voice shook, but his eyes burned with questions. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you come when no one else did? Our calls reached many. The strong heard us. They turned away. Why you?" Elaine looked at him, struggling to find the right words. "Because you asked," she said at last. "That was enough. No cry should go unanswered." Kyle lowered his head, as though the weight of those words was almost too much to bear. He whispered, "You gave back what we had lost. You gave us hope." But even as the bond between humans and survivors grew, danger loomed. The planet trembled beneath their feet. Storms raged stronger each week, and the air grew thinner. The Scientists on the Aurora confirmed what the survivors had long feared. The world was dying faster than anyone expected. The crew gathered in the command room late one night. The readings were clear. Within years, perhaps even months, the planet would collapse beyond saving. Ravi spoke first. "We can't fix the world. Not in time." Elaine's voice was steady, though her hands trembled. "Then we save the people, one by one if we have to." No one disagreed. Humanity had made its choice when they left Earth. They would not abandon those who had been abandoned by everyone else. The stars outside the window burned cold and distant. But on that fragile world, below, a spark of life had been lit again, and as long as humanity breathed, they would not let it go out. The days on the dying world passed slowly, but for the first time in generations, they were not filled only with despair. The humans of the Aurora worked side by side with the fragile survivors, and the planet, though broken, began to show small signs of life again. Elaine walked through the settlement one morning, her boots crunching against cracked stone. Around her, children with soft feathers laughed as they chased one another near a patch of green. Those sprouts had come from Earth's seeds, planted in soil everyone had thought dead. The plants pushed stubbornly upward, a living defiance against the ruins that surrounded them. Ravi was kneeling nearby, adjusting a small irrigation system. Water trickled down into the soil, clear and clean. He looked up at Elaine with a grin. "It's working. These plants should hold." Elaine smiled back. "They'll have food now. Not much, but more than before." The survivors watched everything with quiet wonder. They were not used to strangers giving without asking anything in return. To them, the humans seemed almost unreal, creatures of strength who carried hope in their hands. Kale, the elder leader, often stayed close to the humans. He asked many questions in his careful, soft voice. "Your people. Why do you work so hard for us? We have nothing to give." Captain Alvarez answered one evening as the crew shared a meal with the survivors. His voice was calm, but strong. "We don't measure worth by what we receive. We measure it by lives saved. That is enough." Kyle looked at him for a long moment before lowering his gaze. His wings, weak and useless now, folded tight against his body. We had forgotten such things could exist. To us, the stars were filled only with silence. The days grew into weeks, and changes became clear. Children who had once been too weak to run now played freely. Families moved into repaired shelters with working lights. Clean water flowed from the filters the humans had built. Every step forward was small, but to the survivors it felt like a miracle. Yet beneath the joy, the truth remained. The planet's tremors grew worse. Cracks split the ground wider, and storms swept across the skies with a violence that no repair could stop. The humans knew time was slipping away. Still, they refused to let despair return. Elaine gathered the children one evening and taught them Earth songs, simple tunes of hope and courage. The survivors' voices were soft and trembling at first, but soon their song rose through the night air. Even Kale stood silently nearby, his eyes shining as he listened. "Do you hear it?" Elaine whispered to Ravi. "That's what hope sounds like." But not everyone was pleased. From orbit, distant alien vessels appeared, their sleek designs glowing coldly against the dark sky. They did not approach the humans directly, but their presence was felt. Messages arrived, sharp and dismissive. "You waste your efforts," one transmission said. "This species is finished. The strong survive, the weak fall. Leave before you share their fate." The crew of the Aurora read the words in silence. Some felt a chill of fear, but none suggested leaving. Captain Alvarez stood before his team, his face set with determination. "We came because they asked for help. If others will not stand with us, then we will stand alone. That is enough." When Kyle heard of the warnings, his expression darkened with sorrow. The others heard our cries. They turned away. We did not believe anyone would ever come, and now you are here, even when they tell you to leave. Elaine placed a hand gently on his fragile shoulder. Because you matter. Your people matter. We don't decide who is worthy of saving. We only know someone asked, and we answered. That night, a storm swept across the settlement. Winds tore at the shelters and rain lashed the ground. The humans and survivors worked together, holding beams in place, securing roofs, and shielding the children. In the chaos, one shelter collapsed, and a young survivor cried out. Elaine rushed in, pulling the child free with Ravi's help. Both emerged soaked and shaking but alive. The survivors gathered around them afterward, their voices full of gratitude. For the first time in countless years, they realized they were not alone. As dawn broke, the storm passed, leaving broken debris behind. But amid the wreckage, the green sprouts still stood, bent but unbroken. Kyle looked at them, then at the humans, and his voice carried a strength it had not held before. You remind us what it means to fight. Even as the world dies, you show us how to live. The crew of the Aurora knew the hardest challenges still lay ahead. The planet was failing faster with every day. Evacuation would soon become the only choice. But in that fragile moment, as the survivors sang once more and children laughed among the ruins, one truth became clear. Hope had been reborn. And humanity, for all its flaws and stubbornness, had been the one to light it. The green sprouts grew taller, children laughed louder, and the broken shelters shone with new lights. On the dying planet, a fragile kind of life had returned. Yet above the skies, shadows gathered. The alien vessels that had appeared days earlier had not left. They lingered in orbit, silent but heavy with presence. Their smooth hulls reflected the dying sun, a reminder that others were watching closely. The crew of the Aurora continued their work, but unease hung in the air. Every time a human looked upward, they saw those silent ships, like predators circling prey. The first message came without warning. A sharp signal cut into the Aurora's communication array. The voice that followed was calm but cold enough to freeze the air. Human vessel, you interfere where you do not belong. The species below is broken. They are weak. Their time is over. Leave before you share their end. Captain Alvarez listened in silence. The crew stared at him, waiting for his reply. He pressed the comm switch, his voice steady. This world called for help. We answered. We will not leave them to die. There was no reply, only static. But the alien ships remained, their weapons dark, their silence louder than words. Down on the surface, the survivors grew anxious. Kyle, the elder, spoke with Elaine one evening as the red sun dipped low. His feathers trembled as he asked, "Will they harm you for helping us? Will they harm us?" Elaine knelt to meet his weary eyes. "We don't know what they will do, but we do know this. We won't abandon you. Not now, not ever." Kyle's voice broke as he whispered. Others heard our cries before. They turned away. "Why do you risk so much for us?" Elaine smiled faintly, though her heart was heavy. "Because we know what it feels like to be overlooked. Humanity has always been underestimated. But we never stop fighting, for ourselves and for those who cannot fight alone." The humans continued their work despite the threat. They expanded water systems, repaired more shelters, and planted new crops. Survivors joined them, finding strength they thought had been lost. Children learned from human engineers, elders, shared ancient songs with Elaine, and for a brief time the settlement felt alive again. But the alien warnings did not stop. More ships appeared in orbit, their voices carrying the same message. Your compassion is weakness. You waste your strength on those who cannot stand. Leave before the end consumes you all. The crew gathered inside the Aurora. Ravi slammed, his hand against the table in frustration. Weakness? Is that what they call this? Helping those who asked? Saving lives? Alvarez's face hardened. They see strength only in survival, in dominance. To them, compassion is a flaw. But to us, it is our strength. Elaine added softly, "Then let them watch. Let them see that we will not turn away. If they call that weakness, then we'll show them how powerful weakness can be." News of the alien presence reached the survivors quickly. Fear spread, and some whispered that the humans would be forced to leave. But one evening, when the sky glowed with fire from a storm, the survivors gathered together in the central square. Kale stood before both his people and the humans. "You gave us hope," he said, his thin voice carrying strength. "You stayed when no one else did. If others tell you to leave, then we say no. We will stand with you even if our world falls." The words struck deeply. For the first time, the survivors were not only being saved, they were standing alongside their saviors. That night, Elaine sat alone near the growing garden, listening to the quiet hum of the irrigation system. Ravi joined her, lowering himself onto the cracked stone beside her. "You ever think about what happens if those ships attack?" he asked. Elaine was silent for a long moment. Finally, she said, "I think about the child we pulled from the storm. I think about Kale's eyes when he tasted clean water. If we left, they'd all be gone. If we stay, at least they have a chance. I'd rather fight for that chance than live with the shame of turning away." Above them, the alien ships moved slowly across the sky like silent judges. But no attack came. Perhaps they were waiting, or perhaps they only wanted to watch. Whatever their reason, humanity's defiance echoed through the ruins. The next day, the Aurora received one final warning. "You stand alone. No one will come to help you. When the world dies, you will die with it." Captain Alvarez answered without hesitation. "Then we will die doing what is right. And that is something you will never understand." His words carried no anger, only conviction. The message ended and silence filled the air once more. The crew looked at him with new eyes. Their mission had begun as a response to a faint signal, but now it had grown into something larger. They were not just saving a people. They were showing the galaxy that compassion was not weakness. It was humanity's greatest strength. As the dying world trembled beneath them, that strength burned brighter than any star. The planet trembled more violently with each passing week. Deep cracks split open across the land, swallowing whole sections of ruined cities. Storms grew stronger, tearing through fragile shelters and scattering debris into the skies. Even the survivors who had lived through centuries of decline knew the end was closer than they had ever feared. The crew of the Aurora worked harder than ever. Captain Alvarez gathered everyone in the command room one night as the ship orbited above the planet. The screen showed red warnings flashing across the surface. "We've done what we can to make life possible here," he said, his voice grim. "But the truth is clear. This planet cannot be saved. We must prepare to evacuate as many as possible." Silence followed his words. Everyone knew it was true, but saying it out loud made the weight unbearable. Elaine clenched her fists at her sides. "Then we don't waste time. We build, we adapt, we find a way to get them off this world." Ravi spoke quickly, almost desperately. "We only have one ship. Even if we worked non-stop, Aurora can only carry a few hundred at most. There are thousands of survivors." Alvarez's jaw tightened. "Then we make more ships." The words sounded impossible, yet they sparked something in the crew. Humanity had always built under pressure, creating hope where none should exist. Plans were drawn up that very night. The wreckage of the old alien cities would become their raw material. Earth technology would merge with what little remained of the survivors' machines. If they worked together, perhaps they could build enough vessels to save most, maybe even all. The next morning, work began. The survivors joined in eagerly. For the first time in their lives, they were not just waiting to die. They were fighting for a future. Human engineers taught them how to shape metal, weld supports, and repair engines scavenged from the ruins. Children carried supplies, elders sorted tools, and everyone had a role. But the world itself seemed to resist. Quakes shook the ground, almost daily. More than once, half-built structures collapsed and crews scrambled to drag people free from the rubble. During one quake, Ravi narrowly escaped as a support beam crashed beside him, sparks showering the ground. He pulled himself up, bruised but unbroken, and returned to work without pause. Food and water were stretched thin as more resources went to construction. Elaine often gave her own rations to the children, smiling even as hunger gnawed at her stomach. When Kale noticed, he placed a hand on her arm. "You give everything you have, why?" Elaine answered simply, "Because you deserve to see tomorrow." Despite their determination, the pressure grew heavier. More alien ships appeared in orbit, silent watchers who refused to help. Messages came again, filled with cold judgment. "Waste yourselves," one said. "You cannot save them all. Let the weak fall, as nature demands." Alvarez refused to respond this time. His silence was the only answer he would give. The struggle pushed everyone to their limits. Some nights the humans collapsed from exhaustion only to rise again with the dawn. The survivors matched their effort, finding courage they had never known before. Together they built small evacuation crafts, fragile things compared to mighty warships, but strong enough to pierce the skies. The first launch was a trembling moment for all. A crowd gathered as the small vessel lifted from the ground, its engines sputtering but holding. As it broke through the clouds, the survivors below raised their voices in song. It was a song of farewell, but also of hope. Yet time was their enemy. The planet's core grew unstable, causing massive eruptions in distant lands. The skies filled with ash and the air grew harder to breathe. Scientists on the Aurora estimated they had only weeks, perhaps days, before the planet tore itself apart. Every hour became a desperate race. The makeshift ships were pushed out one by one, carrying survivors to orbit where Aurora guided them toward safety. But not all could be saved at once. Families were separated, some waiting anxiously while others departed. Tears and embraces filled the settlement each time a launch occurred. One night, as the ground shook and fire lit the horizon, Kyle stood with Elaine. His frail body leaned heavily on a carved staff, yet his eyes held strength. "Even if we fall," he said quietly, "you have already given us more than we dreamed. You gave us back our will to live." Elaine's chest tightened. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "We're not finished yet. As long as one of you is here, we'll keep fighting." In the distance, another quake split the ground, sending a river of molten fire racing toward the ruins. The survivors scrambled for safety, guided by human hands. The world was breaking, but so long as life remained, humanity refused to surrender. Above the skies, the alien ship still watched, silent and unmoving. But below, amid the fire and ruin, humans and survivors together carved hope from destruction. And, though the planet roared in its death throes, the will to survive burned louder still. The last days of the planet came like a storm that would not end. The ground shook without pause and fire poured from cracks that split the land wide. The air grew heavy with ash, and the red sun was hidden behind dark clouds. Every breath felt like swallowing smoke. The survivors knew their home was dying. Many wept as they looked at the crumbling ruins of their ancient cities, but they did not stop working. Together with the humans, they built, carried, and prepared the last ships for launch. Hope and sorrow lived side by side in their hearts. The Aurora guided each craft as it rose through the shaking skies. Every launch was a risk. Engines overheated, controls faltered, and storms tore at their paths. But one by one, the small ships made it through the clouds and into the safety of orbit. Inside the settlement, Elaine and Ravi moved among the survivors, guiding families into the next vessel. The cries of children mixed with the roar of engines. Kale, the elder, stood beside them, leaning heavily on his staff. His tired eyes watched the humans with deep respect. "You fight harder than even the strongest empires," he said, "and yet you are not mighty in number or power. Why do you give so much for us?" Elaine looked at him, her face smudged with ash but her eyes bright. "Because no one else would. Because someone had to." Above them, alien ships still circled in silence. They did not fire, but neither did they help. Their cold judgment weighed heavily, as if they were waiting for humanity to fail. Messages had stopped days ago, but their presence was enough to remind everyone that the galaxy was watching. The ground shook again, harder than before. Buildings collapsed in waves of dust and rubble. A scream rang out as part of the settlement crumbled, trapping survivors beneath stone. Without hesitation, Ravi ran into the wreckage. Elaine followed, coughing through the dust as they pulled debris aside. They dragged 2 children free, their small bodies trembling but alive. The survivors cheered weakly, but the sound was swallowed by another thunderous crack. Far to the east, the land itself split open, a glowing river of molten fire rushing. Toward them, Captain Alvarez's voice came sharply through the comm. "We don't have time. The planet's breaking apart faster than expected. Get everyone aboard the last vessels now." Panic spread, but the humans calmed it with steady hands and firm voices. Families were pushed gently but quickly into the waiting ships. Cale was among the last. As Elaine helped him toward the ramp, he paused and looked back at the land he had known all his life. His voice trembled. "This was our home," he whispered. "Now it will be nothing but fire and dust." Elaine gripped his arm firmly. "Home isn't only stone and soil, it's your people, and they will live." The last ships prepared to launch, but there were too many survivors left and not enough seats. Ravi's face tightened as he counted. "We can't fit them all, there's no room." Alvarez's voice came again through the comm, steady but heavy. "Then some of us stay behind. Humans will make the sacrifice if we must. Get as many of them off the ground as possible." Elaine's chest ached at his words, but she knew he meant it. Humanity had not come to save themselves. They had come to save others. The engines roared as the final ships lifted. Survivors cried out, reaching for the humans still on the ground. Cale's voice broke as he shouted from within the vessel, "We will never forget. You are the ones who answered when no one else would." The heat of the coming fire pressed against them, the ground shaking so violently it was hard to stand. Ravi turned to Elaine, his voice raw. "If this is where it ends, at least we gave them a chance." Elaine nodded, tears streaking her ash-covered. "Fursima, that's all that matters." But at the last moment, Alvarez gave one final command. "Aurora, prepare emergency landing pods, pull the humans out, no one is left behind." From orbit, Aurora launched its own small pod, slamming through the smoke-filled skies. They crashed into the ground near the settlement, doors flying open. The crew rushed the remaining humans aboard, shoving them inside even as the planet shook beneath their feet. Elaine pushed Ravi into one of the pods, then leapt in after him as fire swept across the horizon. The pod sealed shut, engines flaring as it launched upward. Through the tiny window, Elaine saw the world below tearing itself apart. Mountains crumbling, oceans boiling, cities collapsing into fire. The pod broke free of the clouds, and for a moment there was only silence. Then orbit came into view, filled with dozens of small ships carrying survivors, and among them, the alien vessels still lingered. Silent observers of humanity's defiance. Captain Alvarez's voice reached them across the comm, calm even in the chaos. "We stand alone, but we stand together, and we will not let hope die." Great. Humans had done what no empire had dared. They had risked everything for those the galaxy had abandoned. And though the planet itself was gone, the people lived. Humanity had stood alone against silence, fire, and judgment, and proved that compassion was stronger than fear. The burning planet was gone. From the safety of orbit, the survivors watched in silence as their home tore itself apart. Great cracks spread across the surface until the world shattered into fire and stone. Oceans boiled away, mountains collapsed, and then there was nothing but drifting debris. For a long time, no one spoke. The weight of loss pressed down on every heart. Children clung to their parents, elders bowed their heads, and the air in the ships was heavy with grief. But in that silence, a different feeling began to grow. They were alive. Against every chance, against the indifference of the galaxy, they still lived. And the reason was clear to all. Humanity had come when no one else would. Elaine sat strapped into her seat in the rescue pod, staring at the broken world below. Her chest felt tight, but when Ravi placed a hand on her shoulder, she drew a deep breath. The people had survived. That was all that mattered. The pod docked with the Aurora. The humans climbed out, weary and covered in ash, but alive. Survivors lined the corridors, cheering and crying as they saw their rescuers return. Kyle, the elder, stepped forward, his staff trembling in his hand. His eyes were full of tears, but his voice carried clear. You came when no one else would. You gave us hope when all hope was gone. From this day, your names will be sung among our people as long as we live. Captain Alvarez bowed his head. We did what had to be done, that is all. But the survivors shook their heads. To them, it was more than duty. It was a miracle. The alien ships that had watched from afar still hung in orbit. For the first time, one of them sent a message. The voice that echoed through the comm was cold and distant. You risked everything for a people not your own. You gave when there was nothing to gain. Why? Alvarez answered simply. Because no one else would. There was a long silence before the voice replied. Strange, dangerous, but perhaps necessary. The alien ships turned and drifted away, vanishing into the black sea of stars. No help, no thanks, but no attack either. They left with the knowledge that humanity was different, small in power but vast in spirit. The survivors soon realized they had nowhere to go. Their world was gone, their cities destroyed. They were homeless among the stars. Despair threatened to rise again, but Elaine spoke before the shadow could grow. Home is not stone or soil. Home is people. You are still here. That means hope is still here too. Ravi stepped beside her. You will not face this alone. Humanity will stand with you. The crew of the Aurora agreed. Though their supplies were stretched thin, though the journey ahead would be hard, they pledged to help the survivors find a new beginning. Together they would search for a safe world, a place where life could grow again. Days turned into weeks as the small fleet drifted through the stars. The survivors learned from the humans, and the humans learned from them. They shared songs, stories, and laughter even in sorrow. Slowly, grief turned into strength. The bond between them grew, not of duty, but of friendship. One night, as the ship sailed through a quiet region of space, Cale stood on the observation deck beside Elaine. Stars filled the window like endless lanterns. His voice was soft. Your people are not the strongest, not the most advanced. Yet you are the only ones who answered the cry of a dying world. The galaxy will remember this. We will remember this. Elaine looked at the stars. Maybe strength isn't only about power. Maybe true strength is choosing to care, even when no one else does. Kyle nodded slowly. Then you are the strongest of all. At last their search brought them to a quiet system with a green and blue world untouched by war or empire. It was not the same as the one they had lost, but it was alive, fresh, and waiting. When the survivors saw it, their voices rose in wonder and hope. The ships descended carefully, landing on soft plains and beside clear rivers. Children ran onto the grass, laughing for the first time in many weeks. Parents wept with joy as they touched the soil. Life could begin again. The humans did not leave them. Instead, they helped build new shelters, taught farming, and shared knowledge. They stayed because they knew survival was not enough. These people needed a future. As the first sunrise lit the new world, Cale stood before his people and the humans. His voice carried strong and sure. We lost everything, yet we found something greater. When the stars turned cold, it was humanity who gave us fire. When the galaxy was silent, it was humanity who heard our cry. We will live, and we will remember. The survivors raised their voices in agreement, their cry echoing through the dawn. And though the galaxy might never fully understand, the truth was clear to all who stood there. Humanity had answered when no one else would. And that was enough to change the stars forever.